Wildfires are no longer a distant problem. They are a living threat that devastates the forests, water sources, and homes of thousands of families in the tropical Andes. Every year, the fire advances faster, stronger, and closer. But some have decided to face it. Not with fear, but with knowledge, with organization, and with hope. This episode captures the voices of 13 leaders and guardians of nature, who, with support from the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, CEPF, transformed how fires are prevented and managed in their communities. Because fire is no game, if we learn to recognize it, handle it, and prevent it. This is the podcast of ATUK, the show that combines science, economics, environment, technology, and society. I am Daniela Ávila, and I will guide you on this path of experiences and knowledge. Let's get started. It only takes one spark. In many rural areas of the tropical Andes, agricultural burning, droughts, and climate change combine into one perfect storm. In Podocarpus National Park, southern Ecuador, CEPF supports forest fire prevention, combat, and recovery. Arturo Jiménez from the Arcoíris Ecological Foundation has seen the impact of the fire firsthand.
In November 2024, when the fire broke out in Podocarpus National Park, it was really something that got us out of place. I mean, to see that our hands were tied and that we could not really put out such a large fire. Not even with the help of the helicopter. I mean, we were at a time when we had no hope, when you say, the efforts I've been making have reduced to nothing. That was maybe a frustration at the time, but at the same time, it also leaves us with lessons. To say, well, there can be hope, there can be alternatives, but perhaps it was the most challenging part.
From the Andean Amazonian foothills of northeastern Peru, Fanny Cornejo of Yuncahuasi explains how ancient customs have become more dangerous due to climate change. Here, their project seeks to reduce the threats of wildfires and agricultural expansion in the Cordillera de Colanqui biodiversity area by building capacity to prevent, prepare for, and fight runaway wildfires, especially by working with local women.
For example, it is very common for people to burn crop residues after a harvest. Because these areas are in montane and cloud forests, which are usually quite humid, it was unlikely that the fire would spread beyond the immediate area. But with increasingly intense droughts, all vegetation can suddenly become combustible. As a result, practices like burning trash, non-organic materials such as small plastics or paper, in areas where a garbage truck never comes, are now leading to the loss of vast regions of land. In contrast, in the past, the damage was much more localized.
Charles Romay, from the Tismain Moseten's Regional Council, Pilon Lajas, in northern Bolivia, reminds us that the root of the problem lies in people's habits. This project seeks to promote the integral management of the Pilon Lajas Biosphere Reserve and the indigenous territory in Bolivia, and to establish a women's group dedicated to improving territorial management.
Everyone there says the fire often starts because the sun is powerful, a bottle of water can ignite, or lightning comes, and people want to demarcate themselves. From an aerial view, I have been able to verify that next to a large fire, there is a chaco. We say chaco for plantation or an open land area used to grow crops. So there is the custom of setting aside forest land, cutting it down, and then burning it. To keep the ground clean, they burn it. It is much easier. It is a bad habit, but it is ingrained. I don't know if that's the case anywhere else, but anyway, even when precautions are taken to keep it under control, depending on the capacity to respond, it almost always gets out of hand. And it is usually done during the dry season, which begins in August, September, and October, with October being the driest month and when most of the fires occur.
Dr. Ana Elizabeth Ochoa Sánchez, professor at the University of Azuay, Ecuador, gives us her point of view from science.
In the tropical Andes, decreased rainfall and rising average temperatures have prolonged dry seasons. This trend, together with the expansion of agricultural activities and traditional burning for pasture renewal, has significantly increased the vulnerability of high Andean and montane ecosystems. tropical Andean ecosystems, moorlands, punas, jalcas, montane, dry, cloud forests, yungas, wetlands, and jungles have a high ecological sensitivity due to organic soils, steep slopes, and variable climates. The loss of vegetation cover increases erosion, reduces infiltration, and threatens the water regulation that supplies cities and rural communities. In addition, fires affect the carbon storage capacity of soils and generate emissions that contribute to climate change, closing a dangerous feedback loop.
What was once seen as a tragedy is today transformed into learning. In Colombia, Aryadna Pantoja of Fundación Vida explains how networking has changed how we respond to fire. The CEPF supported project seeks to reduce agricultural expansion and wildfire risk in the Cuchilla Jardín, Thomas Integrated Management District, to safeguard 3 globally threatened magnolia species and the black and chestnut eagle.
We work hand in hand with Provincia Cartema, which is our main ally as a local government, which allows us to work directly with the mayors and the risk management system, and to reduce the workload to all these councils. And with them, we were able to make calls. We also provide them with kits because they have a broader reach, covering other municipalities, and thereby creating a greater impact on a larger scale. So let's say that in fire safety management, an essential part is the endowment, because some firefighters didn't have boots, some didn't have a radio, which is minimal to attend to something, right? So we were able to equip those fire departments that had no way to communicate. And we also equipped not with a GPS itself, but with cell phones that allow for very good georeferencing. And at the same time, a tool to take notes and all the other functions that they provide. To plan based on need, we held prioritization meetings with our expert, which led to the creation of matrices. We told them, this is the maximum amount of funding available. This is the budget you have. We recommended this and that to address all the threats, and then they made their choices based on their needs.
In southern Ecuador, Fausto Ciaviche of the Amaru Foundation witnessed the birth of something more potent than a brigade, an organized community. His project seeks to foster community support for the conservation of frogs and their habitats, strengthen an alliance of herpetologists, and support institutional strengthening activities.
Well, the project was basically based on organizing 6 community brigades from different localities such as Huigra, Arquillo, San Pedro de Yumate, Miwir, Cochabamba, and Chaganseo. These were the communities we included, where more than 180 people were trained, of which 57% were women and 43% were men. After the alliance we had with other institutions, such as the Cuenca Fire Department and Etapa, which is the public water company in the city of Cuenca, we were able to train them technically on the basic principles. Let's understand that for them, everything was new, but over the course of 2 days, we worked to intensify the process so they could receive both theoretical and hands-on training.
Germán Colaguazo of the Yunguila Corporation in northern Ecuador reminds us that fire can also teach us. CEPF funding has supported community conservation and sustainable development in cloud forests by strengthening land tenure, protected area management, ecotourism, and sustainable agriculture.
First, there is the issue of organization. So in the process, we formed a BRICOM, which is a community brigade made up of men and women. And the most interesting thing is that it was possible to consider young people, men and women, which was very interesting. We have then worked on the equipment for this BRICOM, and then we worked on field action plans. We conducted drills on controlled burning, and even carried out actual burns, which was very interesting. Of course, when you do a BRICOM, you also coordinate directly with the relevant authorities to ensure everything is done legally, requesting permits from the Ministry of Environment to carry out these controlled burns. Through training, you cover the entire process, before, during, and after the burns to manage them safely and effectively. We are part of the ATUK Yunguilla Santa Lucia, which includes 4 communities. Yunguilla is obviously the most directly involved, but there are also El Golan, Niebli, and Santa Lucia. We work with all of them because you cannot focus only on your own territory. If the surrounding areas aren't aware, it can actually become a real danger.
In the tropical Andes, strength arises when the community comes together to care for their land. Rita Vilca, from Amazonicos por la Amazonía, AMPA, in Peru, broke down stereotypes with a campaign that crossed borders. The project implemented by AMPA strengthened management capacity within the Moyobamba Key biodiversity area, involving and training local journalists, with special emphasis on integrating a gender approach, and starring in the campaign, Fire is No Game.
The campaign has been called Fire is No Game, where we wanted to reflect, for example, the bad practices or the so-called customs that exist in the region or in some Amazonian places. What we convey in the campaign is that we should not play with fire, because beyond the fact that in their beliefs it attracts rain, they rather damage the environment, human health, and their food. So I think that the campaign has helped people see beyond, because many times, just what you were saying, we regret when the flames are already up and there you move. You bring water, you reach authorities, even helicopters to put out the fire. But what are we doing to prevent?
Once again, in the Podocarpus National Park, Ecuador, Judith Borja and Arturo Jiménez reinforced the work together with peasant communities and young people to strengthen prevention from the local organization. Rural women's leadership has been essential in preventing wildfires before they occur.
As Arcoíris, we have had an exciting intervention strategy within the framework of environmental education, because apart from working with children and young people from schools, we are working with agroecology schools, which are called the ECAS. They are the agroecology field schools, where peasants, many of them form community brigades, but others do not. They are the people who are in the countryside. They are the people who often light fires. Because, as is already known, one of the most important origins of forest fires is agricultural practices.
The best prevention measures definitely came from the farm, from the women who already have that ability to manage the crop properly, because they have to ensure the food. They are concerned about the family's food and will never expect it to burn, or they can measure the risk of setting fire to a dry area. So, through that practice with them and the inclusion of them under new leadership, women who take that leadership and who can even put themselves in front of a community brigade, the community brigade can raise awareness or support neighbors who, let's say, from one day to the next, are not going to change the practice of burning. But with the brigade, we accompany each other and we see that the fire does not spread.
Magali Tipuni, president of the Tismain Mosetines Regional Council, Pilon Lajas, Bolivia, shares her own experience and vision of indigenous strength and organization.
In 2023, something that had never happened before occurred. As indigenous peoples, we have always made our own small plots of Chalco and have always burned them. That is the habit that we have, but lately everything has changed. It is so that in 2023, a large part of our territory was burned. Of the 23 communities, about 20 were burned. So all of our plantations, everything that we have and collect from the forest that serves us for subsistence was burned. All was devoured by fire. So based on everything that we were going through, we have tried to look for mechanisms. Suddenly, we did not have the knowledge to be able to face the situation, since we had never experienced it. The truth is that it has been so tragic, so painful for me as a woman to see the women of the communities crying, saying that their plantations are being burned, saying that the products they made in a sustainable way to bring the daily bread to their houses were being burned. We have started with all the planning, looking for strategies to be able to have forest firefighters. So we have been putting together groups of young people from the local territory, training them to be the immediate response because no one else is going to take care of our territory. So we have to empower the youth, empower young people, empower women, and everyone so that they can prevent this, because it is better to prevent than to regret.
Prevention is also innovation. Liliana Paz, from the EcoHabit Foundation in Colombia, led efforts to use technology to connect science and community. The EcoHabit Foundation strengthened the capacities of 11 local public and civil society institutions in fire prevention and control, sustainable agriculture, women's empowerment, and biodiversity monitoring to reduce threats in the protected areas of Serrania Pinche, La Envira, and Cuchilla Jardins Temesis in southwestern Colombia.
Since a fire that we had precisely in 2023 in October, which almost reached the Zamarito habitat, we allied with the fire departments, with the peasant communities to start prevention campaigns with radio stations, and we began to show the importance of avoiding and reducing all those fires. These campaigns have been quite effective, and the alliance with the fire departments is key. Now in 2025, we did the analysis using NASA firms, and there are already fires, but fewer, in smaller quantities, and outside the conservation areas. The issue of fire prevention and attention is not only endowment, it is not only the fire departments, it is an articulated work, community, interinstitutional, NGOs, academia, global platforms of information, which includes prevention, but also capacity building for planning, which is what I think is most important. With all the tools that exist, such as climate predictions, early warnings of global forests, and NASA firms, you can place them on the territory through Avenza Maps, which is a cell phone application.
Knowledge also travels through technology. On Ecuador's northern border, the El Tropico Foundation promotes altitudinal connectivity in key biodiversity areas of the Ecuadorian Pacific Northwest, from the Awa territory to the El Angel Ecological Reserve. Santiago Levy explains.
Our response was to articulate the training processes carried out by the National System of Protected Areas in Ecuador with the United Nations. Without Fire Program, we complemented, supported equipment, training, participation, and also with the strengthening of the risk office of a local government, such as the Prefecture of El Carchi, with the provision of equipment and participation in a training program for the use of the Forest Watch global platform. So, the program has been strengthened. It is something important and interesting to be able to see how the local government also complements these issues, and now they use a monitoring system for fires.
César Franco, from the Serraniagua Corporation, sums it up with a life lesson. Here, the CEPF-supported project sought to reduce threats, support women's empowerment, and strengthen biodiversity conservation management in Colombia's Serranía de los Paraguas.
Without a doubt, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that we are just another species within nature. We lose our sense of who we are, that we are nature itself, and that we are beings meant to collaborate, let's say, with the entire cycle of life to contribute to the ecological fabric. In that sense, I believe we need to move beyond the idea that we are Homo sapiens, the only species that knows. The idea is that territories are woven and communities are built. In that sense, conservation cannot be done alone. That would be absurd. We cannot protect a single patch of land while everything around it descends into chaos, pollution, destruction, and death. We need to ally ourselves with our neighbors so that our lives and our dreams can endure. And in doing so, we come to understand that territory is scalable. It can grow broader and broader. Solitary conservation makes no sense, but voluntary, community-based conservation weaves a sense of region, of territory, of landscape, of planet, of community, of life.
Rodrigo Herrera of the project Reducing the impacts of mining on communities and biodiversity in Bolivia shows that defending the environment also involves justice. Their project seeks to strengthen regulatory frameworks to stop destructive mining practices in ecologically sensitive areas in and around the Pilon Lajas protected area.
In 2024, approximately 14 million hectares were burned in the country, which is larger than Ecuador. Given this situation, Bolivian citizens filed a series of legal actions against the state and against legal norms and laws that allowed and facilitated the use of fire and the carrying out of these activities in Bolivia. And finally, a hearing was recently held in which this claim was sustained. And we were informed moments ago that the judges ordered the paralysis of these activities, the establishment of the restriction on the use of fire for agricultural activities, among other measures.
Charles Romay stresses that alliances make a difference.
I believe that the fundamental thing is to achieve the famous alliances, that alliances are not always to manage economic funds, but also to help with protection. For example, we are pretty involved in promoting and training this. For example, Bolivia's National Independence Day is August 6th. We participate in the civic parade as CRTM-PL Lajas, and, well, it goes through the entire city. We go on our allegorical car, alluding to the date, decorated with a hill, a river, and a message that the Pilon Lajas is a water factory that benefits everyone. Therefore, we ask for help to protect it. The entire population follows and supports us. This activity is very effective at promoting the message because there are only 9 park rangers across 400,000 hectares. The indigenous people, who are also a small population for a large territory, cannot control. They need the support of the population, which is 50,000 inhabitants, and of the armed forces. All of them need help without expecting payment, but they need awareness. We have to promote the work, and to get allies, a series of activities have been carried out, for example, involving schools.
In every country, behind every action, lies an emotion. Behind each brigade, a story. And behind every fire, a lesson we cannot forget. Dr. Boris Ochoa Tocachi, CEO of ATUK. Strategic Consulting, a science-based institution in Ecuador, summarizes a set of good practices that CEPF-supported projects in the tropical Andes have identified and implemented.
All these experiences and more than 15 projects financed by CEPF in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia have allowed us to identify 10 good practices that can be applied and considered in other parts of the world, generate alliances for interinstitutional coordination, produce manuals, plans, and protocols for local authorities, communities, and civil society, form and strengthen community, professional, and civil fire brigades, provide training and equipment, including tools and clothing for fire attention, incorporate a gender approach in fire response, environmental education and awareness, as well as monitoring and early warning systems for fire prevention and management, to promote, establish, and apply regulatory mechanisms to punish those responsible, to have a communication and information strategy for the population, and of course, post-fire restoration to rebuild ecosystem resilience in the face of these events.
CEPF's support has been critical for the tropical Andes region. Jack Tordoff, Managing Director at CEPF.
Well, I feel really excited to see the progress that has been made, and also really pleased to see how the grantees have been able to deal with very significant environmental issues that affect their communities, particularly fire, and how they've actually been able to deal with these issues themselves. They haven't waited for somebody to come from the outside to solve the problem. I think a lot of people feel powerless in the face of changes that are affecting them. They may be social changes, they may be environmental changes, climate change, fire, loss of clean water. And I'm always so motivated to give people opportunities to not be powerless, but to be powerful, to use their knowledge, to use their own relationships, to use their own skills and experience to tackle and find solutions themselves. We live in a world where we cannot rely on somebody from outside to come and do things for us. We have to have all the communities living in areas next to forests and in rural areas have the means to address problems themselves.
Thus, among mountains, rivers, forests, and jungles, thousands of people today know that fire is prevented with knowledge, respect, and love for the earth, because fire is no game. It is an opportunity to unite, to protect, and to love the nature that gives us life. This episode of the ATUK podcast was produced by the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, CEPF, with support from the Government of Canada, and the voices of those who, through their work, are building a more resilient future for the tropical Andes. The Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, CEPF, is a multi-donor fund comprised of the Conservation International Foundation, CI, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, the Government of Canada, the Global Environment Facility through CI as an implementing agency, GEF, the Government of Japan through IBRD as trustee of grant funds provided by the Ministry of Finance, Japan, the French Development Agency, AFD, the European Union, EU, and the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation.